News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Barris here on a Thursday. We have a good show on tap for you, and we invite you to join in the conversation. We're going to be coming to you live this morning on the Plus, which you're watching if you are right now. Also, we're going to be streaming this morning on Facebook at newschannel5.com, where you can message me here questions during the program or comments, and I can share them with our guest. And our guest this morning is News Channel 5 Chief Investigative Reporter Phil Williams. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
It's nice to have you on this morning. Thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
And if you've been paying attention at all lately, as you see on the screen there with a phone number where you can call, we're talking about the Metro School controversy, a story more or less broken and driven and followed through till where we are today by the I-Team and Phil Williams, just a great job following the story where it went, and we thought we'd talk a little bit about that. By the way, I also want to congratulate you on a nomination for a Peabody Award.
It's a great honor.
It is, and it's not for these stories, it's for the stories you did on Lead and Water.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And it's you and Brian Staples, who works with you in the I-Team, and Michelle Bonnet, who's with the I-Team and also Assistant News Director here. But congratulations. Of course, you've won Peabodys before, so what the heck. Right.
Yeah, we'll find out April the 23rd about whether we actually have won a Peabody or not.
Well, that's quite an honor, just to be nominated.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, listen, before we get into the details, just in case for folks, we have queued up already the story from Tuesday night, which in some ways has been a conclusion. There's still more to tell on this story, but why don't we show that with regard to what's happened with Metro Schools and Dr. Joseph, the very latest thing. This was the last story from Tuesday night, and then we'll get into our conversation with Phil and your messages on Facebook. Let's have a look.
And Dr. Joseph is a good man.
Emotions were high as supporters of Dr. Sean Joseph packed Tuesday night's Metro School Board meeting.
Please, we need you here. We do not need to empty this room.
School Board Chair Sharon Gentry came to the meeting with a proposal to buy out the rest of the embattled schools director's contract. Under the deal, Joseph's last day would be Friday, April the 12th, but he would continue to draw salary and benefits through July 31st. At that point, he would get a check for $261,250 for the last 11 months of his contract. Metro Schools will also pay him up to $10,000 for legal fees to fight the suspension of his state license. Altogether, News Channel 5 estimates the cost to taxpayers at least $350,000.
Dr. Joseph is ready to go and leave what amounts to hostile working conditions. And so this is a voluntary separation conversation. This is not a firing, so to speak. And otherwise I wouldn't be voting for it.
For months, Joseph has faced a sexual harassment scandal. Did you drop the ball?
I did not drop the ball. I appreciate it, though.
A scandal that has already cost the district $350,000 in settlements, with more expected. Our investigation also uncovered questions about no-bid contracts, including $1.5 million for software the district never really used. And Metro Schools' own law firm recently warned the district faces a morale crisis under Joseph's leadership.
Under these circumstances, I think that it would be wrong to pay the director more money.
Joseph critic Amy Frog argued the board had more than enough reason to terminate his contract without pay.
I don't personally believe that throwing out any number of allegations or accusations is holding the director accountable. We did not hold the director accountable because we did not do our part.
I don't care how many more sticks and stones you throw at me. I understand that this has been a race war in this city.
Another Joseph critic, Fran Bush, lashed out at African-American leaders who had defended Joseph by accusing his critics of being racist.
It's not about the color of their skin. I've always taught my boys it's about the content of their character. And Dr. Joseph did not realize that he had every ability to come in this district and do very well. And he failed to do that. And you can laugh, you can chuckle. It does not bother me. I told you my skin's a lot thicker now because I'm doing the right thing by these children and by the teachers.
And with that,
all in favor of the terms as outlined here. May I show of hands, please?
The deal was done. The school board then picked longtime Metro Schools veteran Adrienne Battle to serve as interim director, making her the first woman to lead the district.
All right. that pretty much covers what happened most recently. Phil, how would you characterize the parting of a ways here? Was it ultimately at the end there a mutual agreement?
Absolutely. I think by this point, Dr. Joseph realized he had declining support with the board. There were recent evaluations that were done where a majority of the board had evaluated him and said that things were just not heading in the right direction. And he realized his support was declining. I think he was tired of the criticism. There were people on the board who felt it was time for a new direction. So in the end, it came down to really a question of, would they pay him as he departed, or would they fire him without pay? And I think a lot of people felt like the best way to kind of put an end to this was to reach a settlement.
And I see that, and we just, you know, as they did Tuesday night, there are many people out there on one side who are saying, well, why not fire him based on some of the things that came up? If they had chosen to fire him and not settle, likely there would have been litigation.
Absolutely. Okay. There's no doubt there would have been litigation. It probably would have been very ugly, been very divisive. There would have been a lot of people in this community who felt like, you know, he was being cheated. And so I think the majority clearly thought that the best way to end this was to reach an agreement.
Okay. And whenever there's a long investigation like this was, and I thought maybe you could give us a little perspective just on not just this investigations but others. When you get into one, you just follow the story where it leads you. You don't ever go into any story with an agenda, but it's from the beginning. How long was this? How many stories do you think you did over what period of time up until this Tuesday?
You know, I don't have an exact count.
I know you wouldn't, but just
but I mean, really, this round of stories began most intensely in July of last year, when we uncovered some serious questions about how sexual harassment cases were being handled. And so it's been very intense since July. And you know, someone called me Tuesday night and said, you know, how are you feeling? Are you happy? And I was like, no, I'm really not. Because, you know, as we did each of these stories, the primary question that we asked ourselves was, does this advance our understanding of what's going on inside this district? And I can say, you know, without a doubt, you know, we weren't just doing stories for the sake of doing stories. We were doing stories that continue to advance the issues, the serious issues that this administration faced. And you know, ultimately, when it comes down to it, we put out the facts, we put out the concerns, and then it's up to the board to decide. I mean, honestly, there's a component of this story that I think there are some lessons to be learned, because this board, you know, the majority on this board, when serious questions were raised, chose to ignore them. And so it almost created a pressure cooker situation, that if you ignore a problem, and then you ignore the next problem, and then the next problem, and then the next problem, it creates a lot of intense pressure. Whereas, you know, if, and we've talked about this before, if they had said, you know, that was wrong, we mishandled that, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. From my memory, I don't think Dr. Joseph ever said, you know, I messed that up. I could have done better. And so when you have the director and you have the school board refusing to acknowledge these problems, refusing to kind of get ahead, try to get ahead of the story, then it just, the pressure built and built and built until it got to the point that, you know, both sides were ready to for divorce.
Go their own way. Yeah, it was just too much to have. And there were, when you saw the stories that you did, and again, I feel they were very impartial and well done, and you followed where it went, but there were still folks who sided with the director of schools, and there may have been some merit to what he's done as well, but when all of a sudden the race component comes into play, and you know, you're white, he's black. This is an African American in a position of power, and there are some who are glad to see a black director of schools. Though in most of your stories, or many of them, many of his harshest critics in your stories happen to be black themselves.
No, and I think that's the thing that's been lost. And Fran Bush raised this question the other night, because all of the victims that we had featured in the sexual harassment stories, all of them were African American. The first gentleman who, it took great courage for him to go on camera and talk about being sexually harassed. An African American person. Dr. Joseph, when our stories first came out, Dr. Joseph told the board, ignore what he's saying. This is not an issue. Ignore it. And so no one has held a rally for him, as Ms. Bush pointed out. Then you had another teacher who came forward, also an African American teacher. No one has held a rally for her. No one has come out and said she was done wrong. You have a human resources manager who says he was fired for failing, or for wanting to investigate sexual harassment cases properly. No one has come out and taken up his cause. You had, most recently, we had an assistant principal who says he reported the sexual harassment of the first victim that we highlighted, and he faced retaliation. And he said that he warned Dr. Joseph, several months before the scandal broke, that there was a problem. It was going to be bad. Again, no one has spoken up for this African American Metro Schools employee. So, for me, it's been very difficult to understand the people who say this is clearly about race. Yeah. Now, here's the one thing I do acknowledge, though. I mean, it is, you have a lot of important symbolism with Dr. Joseph being the first African American director of schools. And I think that was a very important role for him to play. I mean, I think it said a lot about where this community wants to go. But part of getting a position of power and authority is scrutiny comes with that.
Of course.
And there were just people who were unwilling to admit he had made some serious mistakes.
Let's just, as we go to break, acknowledge the fact there were some saying, well, we finally have an African American director of schools, and look at this investigation. Fair to say you did some investigations on the Caucasian Jesse Register?
I did. We did a year-long investigation about testing and grading practices.
So to say that you've never scrutinized a director of schools in Metro Nashville before Dr. Joseph is simply patently wrong. All right, you've done many investigations on, look, Phil, you're colorblind, okay?
Yeah, I mean, most of the subjects of my investigation, because of the power structure in this community, have been, Caucasians.
That's right. All right, we'll take a break on that note. We've got several phone calls for you, and if you'd like to comment as well, we're streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com. We'll be back with Chief Investigative Reporter Phil Williams. We're going to get the man some more coffee right after this.